So again, my name is Greg Fredericks. I'm the Regional Coordinator for Social Studies and Blended Learning and the Administrator for the SSELA curriculum. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. And I'm going to introduce Donna Merlau, who's one of my colleagues. And Donna's going to tell you a little bit about herself, and she's going to be our lead presenter today. And I also do want to mention Nancy Maguire and Linda Brandon, two of our other consultants, who also played an important role in building out our presentation for today, which is on strategies for bringing social studies and English language arts together. So Donna, go ahead and take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Donna Merlau. I am a social studies consultant for PNW BOCES. I've been working on the SSELA project primarily as a resource person for the last year and a half or so. And prior to that, I spent over 20 years in the classroom and 14 years at State Ed. So I bring to you a variety of different experiences. We are hoping that if you have questions, you'll put them in the chat today and let us know.
And we really are looking for participation as much as possible, and understand that this is kind of the beginning of what we're hoping will be a process where we'll continue to explore some of these ideas together and build them out within the SSELA platform.
When Greg talked about setting this up as a presentation, we knew that we only had a half an hour. So the slides for this PowerPoint and the notes beneath them are set up so that these can serve as a template to begin thinking about how to do some integration of your own. So it's a starting point, it's not an ending point. And when I think about social studies and ELA together, I've always talked about social studies as the wind beneath the wings of English language arts. Content and skills in social studies may be unique, but the English language arts reading standards are important, and being able to connect the reading and writing standards and speaking standards to collaboration and research requires that you use some content, and social studies can serve as that content. So by teaching the content and skills, students will gain an understanding of the world around them and develop new vocabulary, content-specific vocabulary and academic vocabulary, and then be able to express themselves clearly in whatever forms you and they deem best, depending upon what you're doing in the classroom. Today, our objective is to do an overview and give you just one example of how social studies and ELA can be incorporated and taught together. And hopefully at the end, there'll be a little time left for us to brainstorm some other ways that you might be thinking about this. Part of, we can go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks, Greg. Part of this is predicated on the idea that the testing, particularly in math and ELA, have really dominated the classroom, especially at the elementary level. And social studies has, in some cases, been really limited in terms of exposure for kids, sometimes not even taught. So it's important that you understand people have been looking for ways to bring that social studies piece back. A study was done in 2020 by Fordham Institute, and there'll be a link at the bottom here in the slides once they're pushed out to you, for you to look more closely at that study if you so choose. But in that study, they found a correlation between teaching social studies and reading comprehension scores. And since the publication of the report, greater attention has been focused on social studies and ELA. So this suggests that a thoughtful integration of the two would help to boost your reading comprehension scores. One of the other things to note is that if you're looking at the test questions that the kids take 3 to 8, there's always social studies passages in there. So, and those are coordinated with what the framework is for those grades 3 to 8. So if you're teaching that social studies content and the vocabulary that goes with that, that should help to improve your kids' social studies scores as well as your ELA comprehension scores. There's a direct tie there. Okay, Greg. So I thought today we would try to look at this through the lens of a single story and make connections K-8 on that story to the social studies practices that are in the framework, as well as the content. So both the skills and the content, as well as the skills and processes that are emphasized in the standards of ELA. So Greg, can you play the book so that everybody's on the same page with what the story is? Thank you. Sound, Greg?
Hi, everyone. My name is Donna Becton Consuegra, and I am beyond thrilled to be part of this series and reading one of our favorite books, We Are the Water Protectors, by two Native sisters, Carol Lindstrom, and illustrated by Michaela Goad, who has such beautiful, beautiful art. I love this book. Our boys love this book, because it is about activism and those protecting our most sacred resource, water. I also love this book because it's about the interdependencies that we all living beings have with water. Let's dig in. To Dan and Sam, and to water protectors everywhere. For Mother Earth and all who defend her. We are the water protectors. Water is the first medicine, Nokomis told me. We come from water. It nourished us inside our mother's body as it nourishes us here on Mother Earth. Water is sacred, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. The river's rhythm runs through my veins, runs through my people's veins. My people talk of a black snake that will destroy the land. Spoil the water, poison plants and animals, wreck everything in its path. When my people first spoke of the black snake, they foretold that it wouldn't come for many, many years. Now, the black snake is here. Its venom burns the land, courses through the water, making it unfit to drink. Take courage. I must keep the black snake away from my village's water. I must rally my people together. To stand for the water, to stand for the land, to stand as one against the black snake. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. It will not be easy. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, the winged ones, the crawling ones, the four-legged, the two-legged, the plants, trees, rivers, and lakes, the earth. We are all related. Tears like waterfalls stream down, tracks down my face, tracks down my people's faces. Water has its own spirit, Nokomis told me. Water is alive. Water remembers our ancestors who came before us, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. We are stewards of the earth. Our spirits have not been broken. We are water protectors. We stand. The black snake is in for the fight of its life. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Greg, can we go to the next slide?
Oh man.
Thank you.
Michael, they're your cousins.
This, oh, he's got to turn off. There we go. If we're looking at that story and we're thinking about water and water protectors, knowing something about the authors is also important. And the narrator in the case of the video said that they were some of her sisters. So if we understand that Carol Lindstrom is tribally enrolled in the Turtle Mountain Band of the Ojibwe, and she's raised in Nebraska and makes her home in Maryland. And Michael Agode is of Tlingit descent and tribally enrolled with her Central Council, and grew up in the rainforest and the beaches of Juneau, Alaska. How might this information, this background about the authors, affect how the students think about this story? So think about that and how that affects the purpose of this book and how you might use it with students. And as you're thinking about that, Greg, we can go to the next slide. I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on We Are Water Protectors, the information about the authors and the illustrator, and go and write in the Padlet a theme, an idea, an event, or a skill connected to social studies that you might introduce or work with your students on.
And I just put the link to the Padlet in the chat. So if you click on that, it'll open up the Padlet for you. Oops, sorry. Open that link in a new tab for us so we can take a look at it. And so if you're familiar with Padlet, what you're going to do is, as Donna said, we're going to ask you to write a theme, idea, event, or skill that this book could be connected to within social studies. What you'll do is you'll come down here to the bottom right hand. You're going to click on that, and then it's going to allow you to go ahead, create a subject if you want to, write it, and then you can publish it, and it's going to pop up here. And as you can see, one of our colleagues has already entered their idea, teaching into context culture of the authors. All right, so go ahead and we'll just take a minute to gather some of our thoughts and ideas. And again, the link to that is in the chat. Some great answers so far. We are all interconnected. The land, physical environment, and activism. Topic or theme could be activism, idea teaching into context, culture of the authors, the Dakota Access Pipeline, responsibility within a community. Using evidence from the context would be a skill. Great.
I'm sorry, I missed how you do that.
So if you go ahead, did you click on the link in the chat?
Oh, no, that's my problem.
Yep,
Thank
so
you.
you got to go into the link in the chat, you click on that, and then we'll take you to this page, and then you just click the little pink icon button down here at the bottom, the scribe button, and then it allows you to generate one of those.
Take about another 30 seconds to a minute, give people a chance to put something else in there. Reliance on water, locating evidence, geographic reasoning, okay? Public service announcement on water conservation. I think I just saw Native American unity, togetherness, fighting for a cause, water conservation and environmental issues. Lots of good ideas here on ways to connect. cultures of authors and the importance of water. Okay, Greg, why don't we try? Has everybody had a chance? Is there anybody else who wants to contribute here before we switch over back?
And that
Thank you
Padlet
for
will,
the participation.
and that Padlet will stay live, so you can always go and take a look at that, and that link will stay live for our group. So we're going to go ahead and jump back into the presentation.
So some of the ideas that we brainstormed and thought people might talk about are some of the same ones that you came up with. Information about evidence, there's claims and arguments. You could talk about cause and effect, what's causing the water or the land to be damaged. Identity in terms of the culture and Native Americans. No one mentioned ancestor stories and wisdom, although that's connected because this comes across as linked to earlier teachings within that particular culture. I saw responsibility, there's resilience. We saw activism, importance of water. Using your voice in connection with activism is another way you could go. Chronology and sequencing might be something that could be thought about. And then content-specific vocabulary, as well as academic vocabulary, probably could be done. Okay, Greg. So in social studies, we have the practices, and this chart is not linked one-to-one. In other words, gather, interpret, use evidence as a practice is not necessarily linked to reading, craft, and structure. They're two separate lists of what the key things are. So on the left side are your social studies practices. Under each of those practices, the 6, there are sub-practices that are called out in each of the specific grade levels. So while they'll be similar, what you're doing at grade 1 for chronology and causation will be different from what you're doing at grade 4 and grade 8. So understanding that those are the practices on the left and that the ELA standards are on the right, and looking for ways to bring those together. So when you're reading a book like Water Protectors, or We Are the Water Protectors, looking at which skills you can bring across, and then looking at the framework to see what you can bring across. If you want kids to talk about what they learned, then you're linking to the listening and speaking. If you're developing vocabulary that's social studies related or academic related, then you're bringing in that ELA skill of knowledge of language and so on. There's lots of ways that you can get kids to interact with these things to grow your ELA skills as well as your social studies practices. Okay, Greg. The framework has key ideas, conceptual understandings, and content specifics. So in the front, when you're looking at the framework, are the practices. And after that is the content piece. You want to marry content practices in social studies to ELA standards. So what I did in preparing this is to go through every grade level, so kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, and figure out where that book might be linked with the content. So which content pieces could you do? So if I'm in kindergarten, maybe I can look at rights and responsibilities. That was one of the items that people brought out. Maybe I can look at specific words and phrases that relate to chronology and time. Those are vocabulary words that you might want to do. If I'm looking at grade 1, maybe I want to look at historical sources. In there, there's a repeat stanza of "We are still here." What does that mean? What does past versus present look like in a 1st grade way of looking at things? With 2nd grade, similarities and differences with their community versus what they're talking about in the book, and so on. Greg, if you could do the next one for me, please. Again, I did the same thing for grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. I made connections where you might be able to do some post-holing. Maybe you want to do something around Earth Day, and that's where you want to bring it in. But at each of the grade levels, these are listed. And when you get the PowerPoint pushed out, you'll be able to look for your specific grade level and say, hey, where can I connect this particular book? But if you've got another book that you want to use or another project that you want to use, you can use a similar kind of idea. Like, where is this in the content piece? What skills do I really want to get at? Which ELA standards do I want to get at? How do I marry those three? Okay, Greg. And so I've done that for 6th grade. With 6th grade, it's probably closest to 6.1, which is a geography piece that kind of anchors you in the Eastern Hemisphere. And then I might look at water in other places in the Eastern Hemisphere. Maybe it's the Nile River. Maybe it's damming on the Yangtze River in China. Maybe it's something to do with the Indus River. So making a compare contrast with how water is looked at by this Native American group as a hook, and then into other areas that are in Eastern Europe. There are Native American connections in grade 7, and there are Native American connections in grade 8, and there's also environmental connections in both those grades that could be made. Okay. So if you're looking to try to find those things, you can go to the framework. That'll take you directly there. And in the framework,
I'm going to pop these into the chat, Donna. So the first one that I'm going to share with all of you, and again, you're going to have access to all this. We're going to share this all out in one link, right? We're going to share this actual presentation with you. But just so that you have and can see and can compare those things, the first link that I'm sharing with you is the link right to the K-8 framework. For those of you who have seen the document before, it is a large document, right? So it's about 110 pages long, but you can simply find your grade level. The state does kind of tease out, right, by grade level, what those skills, practices, and content are. The next link I'm sharing with you is the pre-K through 2 Next Gen ELA standards. The next link that I'm sharing with you is the grades 3 through 5, and then 6 through 8. But these will all be embedded links that you will have access to at the end of the presentation. And this presentation will also be available on the SSELA website, and you'll be able to access it that way as well. And of course, if you can't find it in any of those places, you can always send me an email through the SSELA email system, and be happy to send it to you directly.
so when we're making connections between SSELA, one of the places that I've been talking about is the vocabulary. I can talk about academic vocabulary. That's vocabulary that cuts across subject areas. The word sacred comes up in We Are the Water Protectors. That may be a word you want to instruct on, or that may be a word you think they just need contextually and you don't want to go on a deep dive there. But that's one of those academic words that may cut across. A word like determined cuts across. Then there are content-specific vocabulary words that you may want to look at that are social studies words or social studies specific, just as there are science-specific words and math-specific words. So thinking about which vocabulary the kids need in order to be able to understand the story and in order to be able to communicate about what they've learned. You don't have to do all the words. You want to be very specific and strategic about what you select. Okay, great. So in this section, a colleague put this together for us. She looked at the key ideas, as I had that chart there for you, to say, hey, in grade 1, a citizen is a member of a community. Underneath this slide, in the notes section, I have information on the social studies practices that go with this. So here are the content pieces highlighted for you. This is an area where she thought we could post hole for grade 1. And then you might look at the civic practices piece, or you might look at the environmental geography piece. You could look at chronology and causation here, but underneath each one of these is the specific example of practices that could be used. Okay, Greg. Same situation. So maybe I want to get at the geographic reasoning here and look at how humans affect the environment and how they can cause damage to it. That would be part of geographic reasoning. Maybe I want to look at the economics and why they might want to put an oil pipeline in and connect it to consumers. Consumers and producers are some of the vocabulary that's social studies specific that you may want to get at, or scarcity in terms of resources in relation to what you're teaching in terms of grade 1 and the writing standards here. You may have kids writing a short statement, making a drawing and putting a sentence underneath it, or doing other kinds of things. Or maybe you've got them doing some sort of research related to it through stations. Okay. Again, maybe you want kids to talk about or present to another first grade class on what they learned about the Native American and the Dakota Access Pipeline, or Native Americans and how the importance of stories and their wisdom. This is another place where you can pull the ideas from the story and link it to the social studies content and standards.
Again, just a really important reason for presenting this is just that awareness. One of the things we want you to always think about is the purposeful way, right, of linking together social studies and ELA, but also just kind of generally, and I apologize for the blinds across my face, right, the sunlight coming through. But one of the things we do want you to be aware of is just the idea that you are already overlapping these things, right? But we don't want to be siloing off social studies from ELA, right? And accidentally crossing over is certainly not going to have the same impact on our students as being aware of where these common touch points are, and then being sophisticated in the way that we do weave together social studies and ELA.
And you want to be deliberate in how you are putting those things together, thinking about which content piece, which practice, which ELA piece you want to do there. Okay, Greg, you want to talk about
a couple
this?
Things that we do want to just kind of highlight for you is that we do have some newer resources which do a more elaborate or explicit connection between social studies and ELA. And these are our mini units. And we always want to just make sure that you're all aware of this. So these mini units, and just by a show of hands, for those of you that have your camera on, how many of you have heard about our mini units? They were something that we put out there during the pandemic. All right, so we've got one hand. So this is going to be new for a lot of us. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share the link in the chat. And this is going to take you to the landing page where you'll be able to find this. But I'm going to actually open it up for us so you can all take a look at it. So if you actually go into SSELA, the landing page, without even logging in, if you go under the online learning tab, there are a large number of mini units which we have built out. And these were developed over the course of the pandemic. And they were developed in a way that really looked at, I'm just going to look at it. I'm just going to go ahead. And can everybody hear me? I just got a message from somebody. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Just wanted to make sure that you all were aware of the fact that these are here. So these are banded mini units. And Donna, feel free to jump in because Donna also co-authored this along with myself and Nancy and Linda and some teachers from across the region. And what they are is they are 2 to 3 week units that delve into the social studies framework, but also make really explicit links to the ELA Next Gen standards. And in some cases, the science Next Gen standards as well, the science standards. And so if you go ahead and go into any of them, and we'll just take a look at this first one, the environment and the world around me. They're available in PDF or in Google Doc version. And they're completely and totally teased out with all of the resources embedded in them. And you'll see that they are step-by-step laid out. Some of the later ones that we designed are actually in slideshow form because they're a little bit easier to navigate than a full-blown Google Doc. But there are just tons and tons of both internal resources linked to SSELA and then external resources to other places out on the World Wide Web.
So Greg, stop for just a second. There was a recycle reuse video here. So if you're doing something on environment and you want to link it to We Are the Water Protectors, maybe you want to do something with that video or something else that's inside this mini unit so that you're building out and off of. Okay, thank you.
Oh, no problem. And just so you do see, it is grade banded, right? So as we said, this is a K-2 mini unit because there are common touch points within kindergarten, first and second, but where there are specific tasks, right, or resources for different grades, we've color coded all of those out. So that's this there for you to all take a look at. And, you know, again, we like to use the analogy of playing in the sandbox, and we would encourage you to go ahead and take a look at those. And then, of course, if you have any questions or want to follow up with us, by all means do so. And then one of the great resources that's actually embedded within not only that particular mini unit, but in a couple of our mini units, which relates directly to what Donna had just mentioned, is the idea of civics, right? She talked about how civics could be leveraged across both social studies and ELA. And so we have an Action Civics environmental plan. It's a 5-step plan. Again, I'm going to open this up just to show you all this. It's in slideshow format. It's got great opportunities for students to engage, not only in reading and writing, but also the speaking ELA Next Gen standards. This is something that could be pushed out. You can make your own copy of it, and then you could push it out to students. There's also extremely explicit directions, not only for you, but also to be shared with parents. And Linda Brandon, our tech consultant, actually designed this out. So another just great resource that really could be taken and could get students to get information down, and really is, I don't want to call it a canned example of combining social studies and ELA together, because we want you to think creatively about it. But this is something that does explicitly really bring out those ELA Next Gen standards.
And you can modify this. I mean, you can make a copy of this, and maybe you've got a different civic action projects that you want to do. Maybe there's another book, or maybe there's something else that you want kids to do in conjunction with something that you've begun in the classroom. Maybe it's a letter writing project to veterans to celebrate Veterans Day and to thank them. There are lots of different ways you can play with this to incorporate, again, those social studies content and skills, along with the reading, writing, vocabulary, listening, speaking skills of ELA. So we're just trying to promote ideas here for and get your juices flowing for how you might be creative in bridging these two things.
And again, as Donna said, we want you to take this and to modify this, right? So you just go to File, you go to Make a Copy, Entire Presentation, and you can make it your own. The only thing we do ask is if you do something unique and interesting with this, if you create something that's dynamic, something that really engages your students, please just share it back with us, right? We are by no means, right, claiming to be the pinnacle or the experts, and the best resources we get are from folks like you that are in a classroom space. So our one ask is, if you do really generate or create something really wonderful, please go ahead and make sure that you do share it with us, so that we can, you know, share it out with the rest of the community. And I noticed that Nancy Maguire joined us as well. Nancy, is there anything you wanted to add? Nancy, we can't hear you.
I said no, other than to apologize.
Oh, now we got you done.
No
That's
worries.
okay, no worries. All right, so we're gonna go ahead. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, in this case, the our friend Linda linked improved technology such as steam engine and telegraph made transportation and communication faster and easier with that content, with the ELA piece of writing and reading and vocabulary and those kinds of things. You could do information on looking at gathering, interpreting, and using evidence from the story here, and then what kinds of technology have been brought into New York State to extend communication, transportation, the movement of resources into and out of this area. So there are different places where you could post hole in terms of that. Okay, Greg. You might look at different types of writing that you could have kids do. Maybe they could compare different types of technology that have been used to bring resources to this area or to ship resources out. You could identify a region in New York State that had specific resources that were wanted by other parts of the country, and how are those shipped or transported? How does transportation and shipping from the past differ from what's happening today? And how does that affect the land and the relationship between humans and the land? Okay. Same kind of thing. I might also look at the economics here. Which goods and services are being provided through the transportation and communication? How do I see that happening? I could also look at civics. In this case, maybe if you've got kids speaking about this, you could use the Flipgrid program in order to have kids talk about the resources, or what the relationship is between the resources in New York State and how that's similar to what's happening in water protectors. Maybe I want to look at lakes like Onondaga Lake, or rivers like the Hudson River, or if I'm looking at current issues, maybe I want to look at Hoosick Falls and PFOAs. Maybe I want to link those things together and have them look at water and the importance of water in New York State historically and in the present. So kids could do little reports and use Flipgrid to push it out. Okay.
And again, Flipgrid is in here, so that's going to be a hot link. When you get this, you can actually click on where it says Flipgrid option and it'll open it up. By all means, if you've never used Flipgrid before, one of the things we do provide or support here at SSELA is you can reach out to us, and myself or Linda, who again is our tech consultant, would be happy to walk you through how you could design a lesson around Flipgrid and bring in those ELA speaking standards as well. So again, a couple of additional resources. This is just showing how that same Action Civics environment plan that we looked at before could also be used in the mini unit that's related to grade 4. Again, they are banded out. You'll also find, and I do just want to highlight this because this is a really great example of getting students to communicate their ideas in different ways, the power of infographics. So there's an entire infographics slideshow that's also contained within that very same mini unit, and really just getting students to look at and to access information in different ways, right? Text by all means and paragraphs by all means are important, but we do want students to be consumers of multiple different formats. And that is something that is called for in the ELA Next Gen standards, right? We want students to be savvy enough to look at different kinds of examples of primary and secondary sources and to be able to pull information out of them in real and meaningful ways. So again, that'll be something that you will have access to. Okay,
sorry, Greg. I think the other thing too is that with infographics, they're both doing writing and then they're doing visual pieces so that they're showing what they're producing. And you want other people to be able to interpret that and see if they understand what's being communicated. So that would be a particular choice depending upon the information. But these could be choice boards. Maybe there's one part of the exercise you want some kids to say, maybe they want to communicate using the Flipgrid. Some kids may want to communicate using the Civic Actions Plan. Some kids may want to communicate using the infographics. So we're just providing you different ways that kids can communicate out what they've learned. These are also assessment pieces if you so choose. So for 8th grade, we post-hold with pollution and population growth and the consumption of natural resources and clearing land. Again, getting kids to look at defining and framing questions about the US and gathering information and interpreting evidence with regard to that, using lots of different types of sources. So looking at photographs and art and charts and graphs and artifacts and oral traditions as sources of information and evaluating those as sources of information. That's part of social studies, but that also plays into that reading comprehension piece and the research piece. So maybe you start off with We Are the Water Protectors and then add other pieces of information. There is a book produced by a 10-year-old, Oslin Tudor, called Young Water Protectors, A Story About Standing Rock. And there is information in the notes that gives you information about this book. But he writes about being a protester there and what it was like and why they gathered, and he provides some historical information. Both We Are Water Protectors and Young Water Protectors are from a Native American perspective. It doesn't mean all Native Americans have the same perspective, but these are from a Native American perspective. So perhaps you want to look to see what other perspectives are out there and have kids research that and bring those pieces back and maybe debate. So that they're looking at causes and effects, or they're looking at chronological reasoning and putting information in a timeline about how we got to where we are at Standing Rock. And then expressing it in different ways. Maybe you want an annotated timeline. Maybe you want a civic action project. But you're looking to find ways to compare and contrast how We Are Water Protectors and perhaps Young Water Protectors presented information and other sources presented information. What's similar? What's different? Okay, Greg.
So again, just pointing to different resources and looking at the time, just want to be mindful of that and you'll be able to explore these. So 2 mini units that point to a lot of the things that Donna did say. The one thing I will point out is that the social justice mini unit, you do have to log in for because that required an extensive amount of work. But what it'll do is it'll take you to a landing page and then you would just put in your same credentials that you put in on the normal SSELA page, and it'll give you access to a really large PowerPoint that delves into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But again, just resources to really get into, to share out with, and to really, again, look for those opportunities to bring together both social studies and ELA.
In both of those places, in both the social justice and the environmental mini units, there are specific documents to Standing Rock. So if you're looking to make those bigger connections at an upper grade level, you can find documents there.
All right, so one of the things we are going to ask, because this was, again, just kind of a surface level dive into what is something that we get questions about all the time, right? How to make social studies and ELA really cohabitate together in really powerful, meaningful ways that students can see. One of the things we are going to ask you to do, and we will post this also on the landing page with the rest of the resources, is we're going to ask you to go ahead and take some time. There's a Google form here, which just asks you about what your ongoing needs are. So I popped that into the chat. And what we'd ask you to do is just tell us who you are, and then tell us what you found most useful about your time here today with us. And then going forward, what your needs are, specifically around integrating social studies and ELA in a meaningful way. And then just generally, what your bigger, broader needs are as it relates to social studies instruction. We are always happy and interested to try to create and curate unique offerings. We just need to make sure that we get enough teachers from across the state to attend those. And we understand that given the current climate we're in, it can sometimes be really challenging, right, to get substitutes in the classroom space and to be out of the classroom space. But we're hoping that, as we move to the next stage of the pandemic, hopefully becoming an endemic, that those opportunities will present themselves and we'll be able to kind of continue to create unique offerings to really support you and all the great work that you folks are doing within the classroom space.
Also, I want to say, Greg, that this particular PowerPoint was designed so that you could use it to start thinking in your own classroom how you might push out ELA and social studies and integrate them. So that for each grade level, there are very specific things listed there so that you could think about, oh yeah, maybe I'd try that. Or think about how I might use a different book to do that, but specifically get at the social studies content and social studies practices in conjunction with the ELA standards. So it's a tool, basically.
If I could add something, Donna, one of the things that we talked about was selecting a book that you might want to consider a universal school read. Something like We Are the Water Protectors, or another one that comes to my mind is Amanda Gorman's new book, Change Sings. You could, or Democracy for Dinosaurs is another one that I'm thinking of. And you might want to use that book, have each grade level cover a different aspect of the book, depending on the framework, and then have a day when classrooms present that information throughout. So you can also do a universal social studies ELA project in this way.
Thanks, Nancy.
Folks, thank you so much again for spending this afternoon with us. I did just share in the chat the link to the slideshow, so you will be able to access that. Also on the SSELA landing page, where we do house all of our other webinars. This webinar will be posted. This video that we're watching right now will be posted, as well as the links to this resource and also the feedback form as well. So we're just really happy that you took the time today to spend with us. We are, again, here to support you, and we really do encourage you to go ahead and, anytime you do have a question or you have a wondering, to just, reach out to us. Part of your participation in this community is your access to all of us for support, and we wish you all continued success and health going forward. So thank you so much for being here with us today, and we look forward